So 30.
Wow.
Bryce Allen's back. We love to see it. Privatization king himself. Owen Riel. NDP, you know him, you love him. How ought government look?
So do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so in essence, it's hard to quantify. It's a big question. But essentially, I think like the way that most Western democracies run, through like representative democracy, electing people to a government to make decisions about the economy, and other decisions like that, I think is the best way to do it. That being said, I think we have a lot of problems in like current Western democracies in Canada. Like, I think the public sector involvement of the government is not enough, or in certain places it is done improperly. I think there's a significant role for the public sector in the economy. And I think there need to be more restrictions on what is done with massive amounts of profits for massive corporations and that type of thing. So I think that's the best place I can start.
Okay.
I think if I were to give you a simple answer, I would say, if you were to ask how the government ought to be, I'd say it shouldn't be. I'm against government completely. Maybe a little government on like a very, very localized level, depending on the community and how they want to run their community. I'm not against government. I should say I'm against forced government. If you want to voluntarily have your own system in your area, and everyone and the people in that area agree to that social contract, then I'm fine with that, as long as you don't involve me in it, or anyone that doesn't want to be involved in it. I think government interference in the economy is bad, and I think it's very bad for economic growth. And I think government interfering with social issues is bad. I think it's very counterproductive. Extremely anti-war. That's where I come from with this whole anarchist view, is from like an extreme pacifist kind of lens. So yeah, that's kind of my whole spiel.
Sure. So do you want, like, how do you want to do it?
You can go full on rebuttal to that.
Okay, so
I'll let you guys like run with something for a while and then come back with something else.
Right. I think it makes sense to start with questions. So the first question I would have is, what do you propose should be done? I mean, okay, so let's say you would want to get rid of the federal government, right? That would be an accurate
100%.
statement.
Oh,
and
yeah.
probably provincial governments as well.
Yeah.
And then leave room for like localized voluntary governments.
Yeah.
So when you say like no force, how do you envision law enforcement or even community protection working? Like, I'm open to different forms of law enforcement, but
Okay.
there's some element of it that's necessary, because there are people, whether it be because of poverty or other social issues, that crime happens and something has to be out there as a countermeasure. And I don't see any other way than like force and community pooling of resources to do that.
Well, so I would believe in like privatized security, and your own being able to protect yourself. So I'm extremely pro-gun, not for the fact that I want people running around with guns, but for the fact that I believe we have the right to protect ourselves. And I don't understand the concept that the government can fly planes and carpet bomb the Middle East, but I can't protect myself. I don't understand that. Privatized security, I think it's works a lot better than government police force. If you go to Disneyland and someone takes your stuff, they have their own private police. Your chance of getting your stuff back are a lot better than if it were from the government police. The way you have to look at it is, you can look at it from, there's never going to be that utopia that we all want. I think you have to look at it from the statist view versus the libertarian view. And my view is we should let people deal with themselves and protect themselves, and be their own arbiters of issues. Whereas the statist, what I see from the statist view is we lock people in prison for drug crimes, and we lock people in prison for victimless crimes, and we profit off our prison systems, and it's quite disturbing actually how we treat human beings, and that's all big government,
Right.
and without without big government, I don't think any of that's possible.
So, okay, so I think the private security detail point is one that really interests me because when you look at pricing for security detail, like in the modern world, it's incredibly expensive. Like the average working class person who makes, I don't know, between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, which is like about where the average is, cannot afford to hire like private security detail independently. So I think, I mean, I figure in that sense you have to go one of two ways. And that is you either say to people who can't afford private security detail that too bad for you, if somebody robs you, we don't care, we're not going to do anything about it. Or you get communities pooling together to pay for private security, which is essentially a less regulated, more prone to brute force version of what the police already do. And we already have significant problems with policing and police brutality and that type of thing. So I think when you rip, like at least with modern policing, and it's certainly not perfect, and there needs to be a like slew of changes made, but there are regulations in place and there's an overview of what's going on to ensure that there's not unnecessary force, to ensure that there's not major violations of human rights going on. So I'm wondering, in a communal sense, what's stopping people, 30% of a community or 20% of a community or 10% of a community from hiring a security force only for themselves and then actively using that security force to go steal from people or subjugate people or keep them in a specific area and maybe even forcing them to work. Like, I don't see, without government regulation, because central government is really, really, really important, I don't see how that is not going to happen.
I think all the things you just described, or you just described what public law enforcement does. They steal from people, they keep people in areas.
Well,
if I don't pay my taxes,
yeah,
the police come to my house and lock me in a cage. If I don't let them steal my money from me, they will come and lock me in a cage.
Well, I think you have to take it from the other angle, though, and there's if you don't pay your taxes, you don't immediately go to jail. Like, there's a lot of steps.
Okay.
Before that, you get fined.
Essentially, if I refuse to pay my taxes, eventually I will end up in jail.
Yeah, like over a long period of time, you will, or you'll have to declare bankruptcy, which is not equivalent to jail. But the essence of your point is you're right that force is somewhat the eventual result of not paying taxes. But the problem with that is the way income works and the way markets function is largely a product of what the government sets up. Like when we think of examples of how government functions with infrastructure, with think of roads, railways, that type of thing, especially in Canada, but even in the United States, which is a highly privatized economy.
No,
it is comparatively to other Western democracies, it's a highly privatized economy.
Any economy with a central bank is not a privatized economy.
It's a private.
Well, it is though. Like they're still acting.
That works hand in hand with the government.
I mean, but at the end
and
of
the
the
private
day,
industry,
right?
It's sort of. I mean,
the government essentially runs it though. The Fed is
yes,
run by the government.
That's somewhat true, but
the government decides where that money goes, what money's printed.
Right, but that creates a stable money supply, which is necessary in capitalism.
It actually does the opposite. The Fed is the biggest reason capitalism is unproductive. That's why this isn't real capitalism. In real capitalism, you don't have a central bank. You allow people to trade freely with each other. All the central bank does is print money, expand the money supply, creating inflation, creating prices to go up, and it only hurts the poorest people. So if you actually want to help the poor, when prices go up, rich people can still afford it. Poor people can't.
Right.
If you really want to help poor people, you end the Fed.
No, I disagree.
100%.
Because if you look at the way that the central banks of Western countries have been printing money throughout the pandemic, it's been unprecedented. Like, it's been massive. Something like 50% of U.S. currency has been printed in the last year or so. But the inflation, like the massive inflation that people think there should have been, hasn't happened. I mean, we've seen 5%.
Prices
5% is a lot.
Rising at crazy amounts.
They're rising, certainly, but not to the degree that people expected, that economists expected, that old school, I should say, economists expected.
Keynesian economists have gotten everything wrong in the past however many years. You have to look to the Austrian school, because they're the only ones that have actually gotten anything right. The Austrian school was the only ones that predicted 2008, while the Keynesian Chicago school people were saying that it's going to be fine, there's going to be no collapse. The Austrian economics school has been right about essentially everything.
What do you mean by the Chicago school? The Chicago school, to my understanding, is a very like neoliberal, libertarian school as well. Keynesian, like actual Keynesians who believe in. I mean, I don't know about these schools particularly, but Keynesians believe that regulation and keeping things in order is necessary to keep the economy in order. And that's when we look back on 2008, deregulation of what banks are allowed to do as far as leasing out mortgages and stuff is the major cause of that recession.
No,
And
the major cause of that recession is the wars that George W. Bush wanted to 100%.
No, it's
He had to
stacking mortgages on top of each other.
But do you know why that?
giving
But do
more
you know
and
why
more
that
money.
happened? Do you know why that happened? Because the Fed, the
It
government.
started long before George Bush went into office.
Listen,
though that's the
no,
thing. Though.
okay,
Yeah.
All regulation that was put into place for bankers and the stock market to do what they did to low-income people is what happened.
But
rich never
But that
lose,
starts.
though.
Do you know how that starts? I agree with you.
Yeah.
It starts long before that. But one of the main aspects of that is the Fed and the government artificially lowered interest rates to be able to pay for their wars, allowing people who don't have the money to buy on credit, mortgages on credit, creates a Ponzi scheme, and that's where the market
But
crashes.
who's the
because
number
people
one
don't have the money for
benefitter
it.
from war? Private contractors.
Well, and it's not
And the
just
government.
it's not just
Private
interest rates
contractors
either.
are the reason we still go to war.
War is the fuel for big government.
One of the last okay presidents in the United States, I mean, we're going to disagree on this, but Eisenhower warned about private industry and what happens when Eisenhower leaves office. JFK comes in, and then private industry really takes a
Right.
And then he doesn't want to go to Vietnam.
and then private industry says, "Hey, we don't want JFK here anymore."
Right.
But that
Well,
was also the government.
I don't know.
It's not just private industry. It's the government working with private industry. It's like, it might not be that president himself. It's like I hate the word deep state, but it's the deep state.
Something bigger exists. I think everybody
I think
here
Right.
agrees to
But-
that to some
But
extent.
it's not government necessarily that caused the subprime mortgage crisis was not just a result of interest rates. Interest rates go up and down.
But when
in-
they're
in normal-
artificial, it doesn't.
they're always sort of artificial. It's always kind of artificial.
And that's an issue.
But it's not an issue when it's not coupled with massive deregulation. Like we've seen in the last few years, what some people have argued is artificial lowered interest rates, but we've experienced a recession, but not because of that, because the economy has just straight up slowed down because of COVID, because of lockdowns and that type of thing.
The economy sucks without COVID.
That's true and not true.
We're in so much debt. We print money. We have an aging population that we're trying to pay way too many entitlements to. We have no young people are working. We have no tax revenue. We print money. Like, we're trillions of dollars in debt. This economy is in shambles.
Okay,
Well,
okay, 1 second. What you're saying, 100% true. What you're saying, also 100% true. And I think the most interesting thing is both people talking to each other come from what public infrastructure has created.
Yeah.
You went to public school. We all went to the same public school. I just think it's a very interesting take that you've leaned so heavily into privatization. So I want to say, go back to where we originally were. You both have the agreement. We're fucked in our current situation of the economy. How do you fix that? Do you think deregulate everything, get out of here, government? Obviously you don't, but
Right.
Whoever wants to go first, what's the steps forward now if you could set it up ideally yourself?
Well, I'll let you go first since I went first last time.
Well, I think we just have to. First thing we have to do is cut spending. We don't have the money. We pay out the majority of our government spending. Well, first of all, we're already $1 trillion in debt, more than that now. I don't know the exact number. I know it's over $1 trillion.
Collectively across all government jurisdictions, yes.
We're over $1 trillion in debt. We print money like crazy. We have an aging population that we pay. The majority of our money goes to, our tax revenue goes to entitlements. Our entitlement programs start way too young. I think it's 62 the old age pension starts. People live till 82. That's a quarter of their life of just getting free money.
Well, money they paid into the system through CPP and taxes and other systems.
Not everyone pays equal amounts.
No, but most people who go on CPP actually get out roughly equal or less than they put in.
Exactly,
Right.
and that's
Right, but how? It's not free money though. That's the thing. It's
someone
not free
else's money.
No, it's their own money.
Not
they,
always.
They pay. yes, what you pay into CPP is a reflection of what you get out at the end.
So then why does it have to go through government if that's the thing?
Because a lot of Western democracies in that time found it necessary to help with savings because banking systems were not set up to help people save for retirement, and they still aren't really very well equipped to do that. So the government, because it's a protected institution and because it's stable, because the government coffers in that particular instance are safe, they can use that to hold people's savings for them until they retire so that they can have a comfortable retirement, and it's not left up to individuals who are focused on their day-to-day. Because if you focus on your day-to-day for your whole life, you hit 65, you've got $4,000 in the bank and you're screwed. You have to work until you're 82, which most people agree is not ideal. People shouldn't have to work in their old age. They should have some time at the end of their life they enjoy.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I just don't think it should be the government's responsibility. I think should be a personal choice. But it's kind of besides my point.
Sure.
I think the point like that I'm trying to make is we don't have the money to be we don't, obviously we're in so much debt, we don't have the money to be expanding entitlement programs and all these other things. We are crippling one of our biggest industries with oil and gas. We're taxing it crazy, like I said, that's just increasing prices, hurting poor people aren't going to be able to drive as gas prises rise, which is going to create a further reliance on government, and that's what they want. And it's a very unsustainable system. And I think the first thing we do is we cut government spending. We foster in things like school choice, which expands our ability to receive different types of education, because I think our education system's a joke. We have a police force that Joseph Stalin would be proud of.
I think that's a little extreme.
I don't think it is.
I think it is. We're not putting people
we
in
have-
death
no,
camps
nobody's-
yet,
We
so
have locked people in their houses for 2 years.
that's not the police.
Based
didn't
on
do
what,
that.
though?
No
The
police
police-
showed up.
Without the police, that's impossible.
Yeah, but it's
Right, but
us
why are they locked in their
obeying.
house for 2 years? I mean, it depends, right? Like, there are legitimate reasons that somebody should be imprisoned, right? Like, if
In
somebody
their own
kills
house?
people.
No, I'm talking about COVID.
Oh, well, that's not the same. I mean, that's a public health crisis. Like, you can't, that's the problem is.
I'm not saying it's not a public health crisis. I'm saying it shouldn't be up to the government to tell me what I can and can't do.
Right, but that's
And
the
they
only.
shouldn't have to institute a social credit system for me to be able
Well, it's
to
not
go
a
to a
social credit
restaurant.
system.
100%. What is it then?
It's a vaccination system. I mean, that's necessary. Like, the only way to respond to a major phenomenon, this is the problem with little government or no government, is the only way to respond to a major problem is to have a strong government. That's the only way it's possible. Like, look at examples, like look in Canadian history. The Trans-Canada Highway would not have happened without the
You don't
government.
know that.
It wouldn't have happened.
How?
Because private industry at the time was specifically saying the government was courting them, like, hey, do you guys want to invest in this? We'll put up a little bit of money to get you to do this. And they were saying, no, this is not a risk we're interested in. This is too risky. We have the capital, but we're not going to put it up because it's too long term. And the government said, look, this is necessary. This is going to drive our economy through the roof. It's going to be amazing, and we're going to do it ourselves with some help from private industry. And the only reason that the Canadian railway system and the Canadian highway system happened is because of strong government intervention and investment. It's the only reason. And because of the Trans-Canada Highway and our railway system, our GDP has exploded like crazy. I mean, we would not have seen, the same goes for other countries with other examples. Like, the private industry, the private sector cannot do it all. And it won't do it all because the risk sometimes is just too much.
I think it's kind of far-stretched to say that we're not, without the government, we wouldn't have highways. Like, we wouldn't.
Well, no, that's not what I said. We would have probably some roadways, but we wouldn't have the outstretched Canada coast-to-coast railway that we have now, which is really important. I mean, little roadways are not enough.
I think
You
we
need a
would
coast-to-coast
definitely have gotten to that without the government.
No.
Maybe 100 years later, when the technology was great.
I think
But
when the
did this-
market wants something, the market gets it, and that
Yeah, but the market doesn't always want what's aligned with what the population wants or what the
That's how the
population
market
needs.
works.
No, it's not.
100%.
Because markets are set up, the conditions for markets are set up by governments. Primarily, the conditions for markets, like the reason that we can have transnational trade and we can have such a strong economy is because of government intervention and investment in
We could have
infrastructure.
That without
No, we couldn't. Not in the same.
Why not?
Not in the same way. Because private companies are not willing to take on those massive, massive transnational, international projects. They just won't. The private sector will not do it almost all of the time.
The private sector has expanded everything. Like the amount, the speed we can get things from Amazon, the things that, like the amount of just how easy our everyday lives are is 100% because of the private sector, because of innovation and competition and markets.
That's partly true. I mean, innovation and competition are good factors and hold a necessary place in the economy. But like when you think about Amazon, who built the roads? Who built the infrastructure for these companies to operate on to get us these services so quickly? That's the public-private synergy that we need in capitalist economies. In mixed economies are the best way to do it.
I'm not disagreeing that they didn't do that. I'm just saying I don't see how that wouldn't have happened without the government. Like,
Well,
I understand where you're coming from with
Yeah.
the railways, but I'm just saying, like, it might not have happened at that time, but we would still be in the same place, if not better, today.
No, we would be much worse. It would be much worse. I mean, maybe eventually the private sector would have smartened up and their capital would have grown and they would have said, oh, maybe now, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years after the public sector actually got it done, then maybe they would have said, okay, now we can do it. But that would mean we'd be 50, 60, 70 years behind. And our growth would be 60, 70, 80 years behind, right? So that's the problem is you need the government. You need that investment. It's just not possible without that pooling of resources from profits and from incomes that the government sets up the conditions to happen to put it back into the economy and continue to improve those conditions so the markets can continue to improve.
Okay, let me ask you this then. What do you think that that's a necessary evil in order to have the amount of income inequality and poverty that we have today because of governments printing money, governments causing inflation, causing giving bailouts to the richest? Do you think that those private or public sector what do you call it? I guess interference in the economy. Do you think that's necessary as compared to what we have with income inequality and the amount of harm the government's done to poor people and things like that?
Are you asking, like, is income inequality a necessary consequence because of government?
Yeah.
I disagree. I think income inequality, well, it can be driven by government and certainly at times has been. I think income inequality is primarily driven by the private sector.
You don't think it's driven by the welfare state?
No, not really. The welfare state is overwhelmingly successful at lifting people out of poverty. Like my family literally is middle class because of the welfare state. My great grandmother came from Ireland, lived here for a long time. She worked for a long time, but there were years where she needed what was at the time the mother's benefit, right? And she used that benefit to stay home and take care of her children who needed her for their cognitive shaping, for their raising, and several of those children ran their own small businesses. Some of them worked in expert level jobs like engineering and things like that. And from one person who accepted welfare, who needed it, she created 5 children who all were economically very successful and raised their own material conditions. That's what the welfare state is for, and that's what it overwhelmingly does. There's abusers, but the abusers of the welfare state are just going to be there no matter what. It's not possible to get rid of them, and they're not the majority.
Okay, so I think it's a little far-fetched to say that that's not due to, like, good on your family, 100%. Yeah. That's a great story, but I don't know if that's because of the welfare state or because of hard work and and merit, like, and the
Well, it's both.
meritocracy.
It's both.
And that's what the free market, produces, is people who create value are rewarded.
But when my grandmother or my great grandmother couldn't have found a job, there were times when she couldn't find a job. She couldn't find anybody to take care of her children while she was working, and she needed to be home and she needed to accept that welfare. What are people supposed to do in that case? Because the private market is out there. I mean, this was not a generous benefit. This was the, I don't know, the 50s or the 60s or the 70s.
Yeah, no.
I mean, the benefits were not generous.
No, I know
then.
what you're saying, but I don't think that, I think private charity does a lot better, is a lot more efficient in getting people the resources they need. Like, think about, it was a good example that I was listening to the other day, like Haiti. Think about how quickly they raised like tens of millions of dollars for Haiti. Think, like, there is nothing more efficient than a person-to-person transaction. All government is a third party intervening in that transaction.
Well, that's
then deciding
not really true.
where it all, essentially government is an arbiter.
Yeah, that's true. An arbiter and a representative and a tool.
The government doesn't represent me.
Well, it does if you vote. I mean, it's not completely accurately in the way that the electoral system stands, but broadly, people are represented and people do have effects on the government.
But I don't think
when attitudes change, governments change. Overwhelmingly in Western democracies.
Culture, I would definitely agree with you that culture is a lot more relevant than politics. Would you agree? That is something I think, especially over the past, with the COVID stuff, I think culture definitely dominates politics. Politics doesn't dominate culture.
That's hard to say because they're products of each other.
Think about if Canadians just rejected the whole COVID regime. Just rejected all of it. They would never be able to go with the stuff that they're going with.
Sure.
The amount of government overreach that we've had. If the culture stood and we had a culture where we didn't agree with that, there was no way that it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But because I don't know what it is in Canada, I think people don't really care about politics.
People care about each other in Canada. That's the difference. Is in countries where they rejected restrictions, especially in the United States, I hate to say it, people are more individually centered. People believe that I want what I want, basically. But this is not the case for all states. This is not a general statement. But in a lot of places where there are less restrictions, people are more apt to say, I am interested in furthering my own agenda, and I'm not interested in the collective good. In Canada, we say the collective good is really, really important. And people accept these restrictions on that basis, that the collective good is important. And the collective good is necessary to foster a community that can grow within itself and project a solid image to the rest of the world. That's what the Canadian value system is, and that's why people accept the restrictions, even though they're inconvenient. Like, I acknowledge wearing a mask can be inconvenient, right? Having to get out my phone and show my vaccination certificate thing can be inconvenient, but it's necessary. It's a necessary part of what happens when a large society faces a large problem. And it's a necessary consequence of government and a good consequence of government.
I mean, I never signed a social contract. The government doesn't represent me. I don't see why I'm forced into this coercion. There's nowhere did I say that I want to show people my medical history.
And you don't have to. You don't have to go to those institutions. I mean, that's not sustainable.
That's not a fair argument to make.
It is, because
to
it's not on a
participate in
permanent
everyday
basis.
life. To participate, I can't go to university if I'm not fully vaccinated. And
right.
And to say, okay, that's not the government. That's
partly the government.
It's the government.
But
if it wasn't for the government,
but it's also your peers. It's also your peers. 90% or more probably of your peers in university want you to be vaccinated, want their peers to be vaccinated for their own safety. Because it's true. It's true. In universities, people and in other places, people are overwhelmingly wanting their counterparts at the university to be vaccinated so that they feel safe, right? And that's a necessary part of democracy, is the government looks at the wants and needs of the population. Most of the population in Canada, even 80% of Ontarians, say, I don't want to be in a high-risk setting with other people who are unvaccinated.
Well,
when it's
then
80%. Right, but that's the same thing that they could say about you. or well, I know you're vaccinated, but somebody who's not vaccinated,
Yeah, no, yeah.
right?
But I'm saying,
That's the problem, and it's not. This is not something that would normally happen under normal conditions, but it's not normal conditions. It's a pandemic. Safety is a massive concern, and the government, I think, honestly, has driven a decent limit between where people's rights are and where the limits under a pandemic are supposed to be. Only the most high risk and unnecessary services and goods have been siphoned off on the basis of vaccination.
I just don't. You can make sense of any of these arguments. Like, I'm not disagreeing. Like, obviously I disagree. Obviously I don't think it's necessary. But I just don't. There's no moral argument to tell that makes someone be able to tell another person how they have to live their life.
Well, it is, because if that person wants to live their life in a way that can endanger other people's lives, that's a moral argument to say that is one person's want more important than another person's need.
Okay, but also vaccination me being vaccinated has zero connection to your health.
That's not true.
No, it's 100% true.
No, it's not.
All the vaccination does is keep myself from being more sick. That's all it is.
No, that's not true.
No,
it also
is.
prevents transmission. Not completely, because typically no vaccination prevents transmission completely, but even with the Delta variant that is much different from the initial variant of COVID-19,
and the Delta variant in first world countries has actually had a lower death rate
because of vaccination. Because the Delta variant came about around the time that people were getting vaccinated on a mass scale.
Well, I think it's also kind of hard to compare stuff like the Delta. Everyone was scared of the Delta variant because of what happened in India, but I think it's kind of not fair to compare the Indian population to the UK, because the UK had a big outbreak of the Delta variant and it did nothing.
Because it was largely vaccinated when they had the outbreak. India was not largely vaccinated when they had the outbreak. And India, I mean...
But it's also you got to think of different health standards. I think it's fair to say that... That's
not the primary driver, though.
The primary driver with COVID is your personal health. 100%. That's a proven fact.
I think that's the second most. I think vaccination is the highest indicator of whether or not COVID will make you seriously ill. Well, the second is personal health.
Well, no, I think the first is age, personal fitness, and health.
Maybe age is the highest.
Age, the average death for COVID is older than the average life expectancy in Canada.
Sure, but I still don't think we want to be actively doing something that could harm older people. I mean, they have the right. They have the right to life. That's the nature of the right to life in the Canadian Constitution and the American Constitution. Is particularly in a Canadian setting, the right to life applies to everybody, whether they're old
100%.
Or whether they're young. So we need to work to prevent them from getting sick. I mean, it doesn't matter if they're older. It's like, oh well, them getting COVID is less important, or them dying is less important. That's not really how we should look at it. I mean, we should look at it as any death is bad.
So should we just start doing this for everything? Should we just stop driving cars because car accidents happen? Should we stop?
No.
What's I don't understand where we can draw the line.
Because driving a car is actively something that has massively helped society and helped people. And the rate of accidents don't measure up to the benefits that we get.
I think I would argue that keeping small businesses open actively helps society too, but we shut those down.
They are open right now.
Right now they are. We shut them down.
I mean, they shouldn't. The way small businesses were treated, I'm not disagreeing, was abysmal under COVID. It was ridiculous. But small businesses are open right now, and that's a product.
How many of them didn't open back up though?
I know. I agree. That's a bad thing.
Thousands.
They should have been provided with more government support through that time, because a lot of small businesses can't distance, couldn't open safely. They should have been provided with massive government support.
Or they should have just been able to stay open, and if customers wanted to go, then they would go.
I know, but that's how we get a massive death rate. That's how we get people dying and our health system overwhelmed. And I mean, we have a pretty solid health system, but our health system would be overwhelmed if we had done that early on. So the only way to do it would have been the government to adequately keep these small businesses alive until the pandemic is over.
But they didn't.
No, but they should have. I mean, and that's the nature of government. Without government, you don't even have that option. Without
government, the business would have been able to stay open.
Yes, and people die
and
at a much higher rate.
Customers would have been able to be free to choose what they want to do with their lives. And I think that's the best way to do it. If you're scared of COVID, that's your own choice. You can take the measures that you want to take, and I respect that. But to say that I have to do something because you're scared, your fear has no effect on my freedom.
But your actions have an effect on other people.
Yeah.
If you spread COVID to somebody, that's an action that you took that negatively affects them.
Okay, but that's
and could kill them even.
Okay, maybe if you like I'm gonna go give you COVID. I
don't think COVID that's is spread
valid.
Pretty easily.
So is every other sickness.
Yeah, but other sicknesses don't have the same death rate as COVID-19. And if
the
they do,
flu actually has a higher death rate for young people than COVID.
I don't know that that's true, but but the deaths from the flu are not comparable to what COVID is. I mean, among the general population, COVID is a killer of a much higher order, especially with the Delta variant.
With older people, yes.
Yeah, and even middle-aged people. Middle-aged people are, seriously, at points in the pandemic, it was looking really, really scary for middle-aged people. And that's when the government went, okay, we're locking down again. We need to keep things in order. We need to keep people safe from this. But we did have, at times, rising death rates among middle-aged people even. That's our mums and dads. That's really scary. And that's the nature of the disease, and it's more serious than other diseases.
Okay. COVID this, COVID that.
Can I just make one last point on COVID before we start?
You got a minute. Go for it.
If we are so worried about, if the government is so worried about our health, then why do we allow cigarettes to be sold? Why do we allow alcohol to be sold?
Because now we put a picture of a gross lung on it.
Yes,
the government's actions have majorly decreased those habits, especially cigarettes.
Because you can't promote cigarettes on TV
anymore. What about if you think that I should be able to if my choices with COVID affect you, then why should someone who say gets lung cancer from smoking cigarettes, why should my tax dollars go to their treatment?
Well, tax dollars go to people who make bad choices about COVID as well. That's just the nature of the system. We don't discriminate. We do our best on the front end, on the getting the disease end, to help people and to direct them away from these behaviors that could hurt them. But on the other end, we have the morality and the virtue to say, look, even if they made bad choices, it's our responsibility as other people, as a system, to do what we can to keep them alive.
But it's not. I'm not responsible for anyone else's bad choices. I'm responsible for my own bad choices.
Society is responsible, and that's the society that you're in.
You are responsible for your choices. I'm responsible for my choices, and Mike's responsible for his choices.
That's not how our society views choices. I mean, in certain cases it does. In certain cases, individuals have individual choices.
I just don't see them. Where can you make a moral argument that I should pay for someone else's bad choices with my hard-earned money? If
they're going to die, that's a responsibility that I think we all carry together as a society. When you pool money, it's not as expensive for somebody to take care of their own family member who may have made a poor choice and resulted with a serious health condition. As a society, we say, look, even though there are poor choices involved, people make poor choices all the time. That's human nature. Yeah. People make bad choices, and we as a society feel responsible for helping them. That's a moral good that society has always pursued.
Do you agree that if we held people accountable for those choices, say maybe if you did, I brought the smoking one in, I'm sure there's many other examples.
If you eat red meat, which is a class 1 carcinogenic, and get cancer, you shouldn't be allowed to get health treatments.
No, I'm saying no. I'm not saying you shouldn't be allowed to. I'm saying if we held people accountable for those and maybe made them pay for themselves, do you think that those issues would shrink?
Probably to some degree, but I don't think very much, and I don't think that would be a good thing overall. I don't think
limiting bad choices.
No, limiting bad choices, but we do that on the front end. We do that.
How?
We do that with cigarette campaigns. We say, look, cigarettes are horrible for your health. We stop companies from advertising them.
And the government actually hid that for years.
No, the private companies hid that. The corporations hid that. The corporations had their own. No, not really. The corporations, like in Minnesota, there was a famous case. These corporations had their own internal science that was largely deregulated, but very strong science that said this is really awful for people. And the Minnesota government had to lobby them and fight them tooth and nail in the legal system, which is a beautiful framework for societal function. They had to fight that company tooth and nail to get them to release those papers. And when those papers were released, the jig was up for cigarette companies. But it was only when the government fought the private company that was selling cigarettes and had this data tooth and nail for a very long time before we could actually get the results. It was a direct government intervention that helped with reducing, helped with learning about how bad cigarettes were, and then government programs and interventions that help people not die from smoking cigarettes so often because they discourage the use of it.
But I still think that any one of those programs is more effective without the government if it's just private programs. But at the same time, what about if we're gonna stick on healthcare for now? What about government? What's the word, like this, like CDC or any of those types of organizations approved medications or anything like that? Vaccines is another big one that are approved and then years later are shown to cause issues. The government isn't liable for that? Do you think they should be?
No, of course not. I mean, I think it's bad. It's a bad thing, of course, when governments approve drugs that hurt people. But I think overwhelmingly the effect that has, the approval process, the 3-stage scientific review, and then review among like medical boards on the CDC or the Canadian counterpart, overwhelmingly have a positive effect of weeding out drugs that are going to have major side effects that are possibly foreseeable with the science that we have available. I mean, if you look at the private market when it comes to medications or medical supplements that people like Joe Rogan and Alex Jones sell, these are things that are massively deregulated. But I'm just saying, this is an example of what the private market, what can happen in the private market when there's no regulation. These individuals are selling supplements that may work or may not. There's no scientific proof behind them necessarily. They may cause major side effects, but because they're not regulated, nothing can be done about it. If these supplements had to go through the same approval process as medicines, then we could actually weed out the negative effects of them. Those processes are super, super, super necessary.
So what about, for example, like the opioid epidemic?
What about it?
Do you think that the government has helped create that?
In part, of course, yeah.
100.
I mean, it's not. It's
100%.
Yeah. I mean, there are complicated cases.
That epidemic kills a lot more people than COVID. Why aren't we talking about that?
Suicide well, we do talk about it. It was one of the most covered news topics before COVID happened.
But why has nothing been done about it?
Well, things have been done about it. I mean, you've seen what do you call them? Safe injection sites and stuff for people who have addictions.
Totally for those.
Yeah. But that's product of what the government has responded by doing, is sponsoring sites like that.
Okay.
And of course it's a product of government, but at the time that probably I'm not an expert on opioids, but probably at the time the science of using opioids for pain relief was the best that we had. Right? Even though we know now that it was a horrible mistake, that we shouldn't have done that. The science at the time probably said, and the science of the time is the best we can operate on, probably said that was the best route to go.
So the science of right now, from my best understanding, because this is something I'm actually very interested in, is the science of right now says that psilocybin, so like mushrooms, and actually MDMA, what's the other one that they've been using? Like marijuana as well. There's a couple other things are actually a lot, especially with things like PTSD, soldiers, stuff like that. So
hallucinogens are
very, very
emerging as an effective treatment.
So why, if that's the best science we have now, why don't we go towards those?
So
I think just the broader point that I'm trying to make is when you have a government who's unaccountable for any of their actions, which is true. The government's unaccountable.
They are accountable, though. They're accountable through democracy. I mean, we have a democracy. Okay. That's the basis of democracy. But unpopular governments who have done unpopular things have largely been voted out in the past.
Have you heard of the index card of allowable opinion? Do you know what that means?
No.
So it's essentially the government freedom means that we get to play the game.
Mhm.
Freedom doesn't mean we actually get to be free. Freedom means we get to play, we get to take part in the game, which is democracy.
Okay.
So essentially, if we have 5 major parties in Canada, 4, something like that, whatever, if you aren't on that index card of allowable opinion, they will do, the media, the government will do whatever they can to shun you. That's what they did with the PCP.
PPC.
PPC, sorry. PCP. That's
That's a
Mine was
very,
on
a very
drugs,
bad
it's all
drug.
what?
PCP is a very harmful drug.
Oh, really?
Like an addictive, yeah.
It's another
But
hallucinogenic.
the thing
Oh,
is,
right.
the
Yeah.
but they were against lockdowns, against like whatever. I'm not saying I agree or don't agree with them. I'm just saying what was done to them with this election just it shows how shunned they were, and how, like, if you don't hold that establishment opinion,
like in the Overton window.
if you're not in the Overton window, if you're not part of the club,
Mhm.
you're done.
Well,
and that just shows that our democracy.
That's not entirely true though.
You've seen it in the U.S. all the time. Like, think about how Tulsi Gabbard was treated. Think about how Andrew Yang was treated during the primaries. Think about
Andrew Yang got quite a bit of media coverage.
Yeah,
and so did the PPC. I mean, the PPC did receive at times fair media coverage, even from the CBC.
No,
they got fair.
no,
they
didn't.
They did.
They were not.
They
They
absolutely
didn't
did.
even let them debate.
No, because that was because of restrictions on how. Because here's the problem: if you have no restrictions on who is allowed at the debate, you're going to end up with like 9 candidates. Which is not
but
tenable. They had no seat, no representation in Parliament, and again, they didn't gain that.
And
they had
also
5% of the vote. Their vote is inefficient. That's just a
But they polled at high enough numbers according to the guidelines where they should have been on the debate stage, 100%. That's a fact.
Well, but there's 2.
So then why weren't they?
Because there's 2 requirements: the requirement to have a seat in the House, and the requirement to be 3% or above.
I don't think having a seat on the House matters, because Bernier was in it for.
And he got to debate that year.
Yeah, so they didn't have a seat in the House.
Yeah, he did.
No, he didn't.
Yeah,
PCP's never had.
Yes,
Why
they
do
had.
I keep saying that?
They had.
PPC.
They did, because he was elected as a conservative, changed to PPC, and he was allowed to debate in that debate. Because he was the sole PPC member in the House.
But at the time he was not in the House under that party, so
you can switch parties in the House.
No, I know, but I'm saying they created their own party.
Yeah, and they had representation in the House.
So,
which is why he was allowed to debate. That's just how the rules work.
But he was never in the House.
Elected as a PPC member.
He was never in the House as that party.
Yes, he was.
Are you sure?
Yes. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
You can change your party, because like all the time especially like in the Westminster system, which is like roughly what we have. It is what we have. People can say a conservative is like really pissed off with the Conservatives, they can cross the aisle and join the Liberal Party.
That does happen.
So they can also, if you create your own, if you're a sitting
happen.
MP and you create your own party, you can be part of that party in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
And then the consequence sometimes can be you get voted out, which is what happened with Maxime Bernier.
Okay, so do you believe if, say, it was the Green Party who, I don't know, how many seats do they have? 2 or 3, something like that?
They have 2 currently.
2 currently. Yeah, I think.
But they met the requirements.
Okay, so if they didn't have a seat at the time, do you think they would have been allowed to debate?
No, they weren't for years before. They weren't for years. I mean, before 2011, the Green Party was never allowed to debate. Elizabeth May was not allowed to debate in the debates because they didn't have a seat and they didn't meet the polling numbers. Or they did meet the polling numbers, but they didn't have a seat. In the 2000, oh God, I'm going to get the years wrong. 2002, 2006. I believe 2008, I might be wrong. In all those elections, Elizabeth May, despite having 2 or 3 or 4% of the vote, was not allowed to debate, and that's just a standard rule. And she's a left winger, right?
Oh,
obviously.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So
but
it's not a political.
She was
bias
also
thing.
pretty anti-establishment for the most part.
Right, but so's the NDP. I mean,
no, they're not.
They absolutely are.
How?
They're anti-political establishment.
How?
I mean, what do you mean how?
Like, how are they?
How is Elizabeth May anti-establishment?
She was against. She's against a lot of things. She's against a lot of corruption things. She's very.
NDP.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
They pretend to be, but they
Oh,
are.
come on! No.
The NDP is right.
You have to go. No. You have to go by.
They pretend to be
you can't
anti.
Say, I could say anything. I could say Maxime Bernier pretends to not be a white supremacist, right?
Because
that's
what shows that he is.
But that's the thing.
That's why.
Or I could say Andrew Scheer pretends not to believe in leprechauns.
Well,
Like, that's an insane thing to
he's
say,
an idiot,
because
but
what they say
this
is
is
you
what
have to go
this
by the
is what the
platform.
left does.
And
This is what the left does.
no. Their platform is anti-establishment. It's anti-corruption. It's anti-big money in politics. You can't just say, oh, they don't really believe that, but they do. They've always fought for that. And that's what's in their platform.
This is what I would say, like the Jack Layton days, I would say 100%. I'm saying now what the left has done is the left has been able to manipulate language, manipulate culture, manipulate all these things, and they are the establishment now. The universities, yes, they do. They work with the universities.
The liberals and the conservatives are the political establishment. There's no cultural.
The liberals and the conservatives are the same.
Yeah, I agree.
It's the media. It's not just the political establishment. Is the government, the media, the universities. That it's
yes
a whole
and
cathedral.
No. You're not wrong about that, but the establishment is not
the
just
NDP
defined.
and the far left is what drives the conversation. And
no,
and I blame the
that's totally
conservatives.
not true.
I blame the conservatives for it. I blame it's a conservatives' fault because
left-wing social advancements are not a representation that like the far left or even the NDP, which is really not that far left.
they have co-opted this social Marxism. And
no, the NDP is not like insane far left. They're quite reasonable in their prescriptions based on other Western democracies.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying the way that they've switched from being like a populist, economic based identity into this. Everything's about racism and critical theory, and that's where the left is. That's where the left is. 100%.
The left cares about social issues, of course, but because
they use it as a way to control the population.
No, that's not true.
Like what you did there when you said I could lie and say Maxime Bernier is not a white supremacist.
Mm-hmm.
That is what the left does, because how can I argue with that? Because as soon as I try to argue that, the left can turn it on me and say you're a racist, and that's exactly what they do, and that's how they've dominated the culture.
No,
they said
that's not true.
They said that in the I think it was the 30s. When it was I'm gonna kind of butcher this a little bit because I don't remember the names, but there was a real communist was before the Senate, I think, or the House one.
Yeah.
And they said communism will come to the West in big words. And that's exactly what's happened.
No,
yes.
Come on. This is not.
The left has been able to.
This is a silly argument.
No, it's not.
It is.
The left has been able to manipulate
the idea
language.
that the NDP or even the Liberals or the Greens are communist in any way is insane.
Socially, we are headed 100% towards social communism.
No,
and that's because
what is social communism? Okay. Communism is an economic system.
Okay.
Social.
But I need to say one more thing.
No, I'm gonna let you guys round out.
There's one more thing I gotta say about
minutes.
social issues. Just give me 30 seconds.
Finish it off though. Okay. Like round it out, and then
round
I'll
out the whole thing.
Yeah, and then I'll let you rebuttal, and then that's all the time we have this evening.
So I would say that the left broadly is not about just calling people racist or sexist just for no reason. There are reasons why the left has advanced these issues that are really important to vulnerable groups. We think of gay marriage. We think of hate speech laws, which are overwhelmingly protective of people who are vulnerable and victims of violence. These are things that the left has adopted. It's not just a method to control people. It's a method to protect vulnerable groups so that they can participate in our massive, fluent democracy. I think that's the major theme, is governments and parties and political movements are necessary to influence government to push things in a progressive direction. I mean, when we look at the way modern political parties operate, we live under an electoral system that is not always fair, but is largely representative of what the population is wanting. Social movements have been overwhelmingly successful in furthering the rights of people and making them more comfortable in embracing both their identity and the speech that comes along with their identity. We look at the way political movements have influenced the private market and pushing things in a more positive direction, increasing infrastructure spending so that people can get to their jobs and so that people can make more money, and that the economy overall can grow in a more sustainable, progressive way. I think that is the takeaway, and that's why government is necessary. That's why politics is necessary. That's why representative democracy is necessary, is pushing things forward in a representative way where people get to vote on the very issues that define their lives. And it's important to say that markets and the social sphere of our society is shaped at least in part by government, and government is a necessary cycle of that function. That's what I end on.
Okay.
Round
I
her
think,
out.
yeah, I'll finish it up here. I think any sort of logic, not even logical, like any sort of argument you want to make for government, you can make that argument in a sound manner. Like, you won't sound crazy. I might sound crazy with the arguments that I'm trying to make because it's very
Extreme. I mean, saying get rid of government completely.
Yeah.
It's extreme,
No,
but like
100%.
I understand.
People would call me radical. I would call statists radical.
Sure.
But I think the morality behind things like taxation and government itself and democracy. I don't think democracy is moral. I don't think someone else should be able to decide if you two vote something that I don't disagree with. I don't think it should have, just because you two voted it and I didn't. I don't think it should have. It should influence my life. I think I should just be able to decide how I want to live my life and how as an adult, how your family lives your lives, what your kids learn in school, what all these types of things, what you do with your money. I don't think that anyone else should have a say in your life other than you and your family and the people that you allow to have a say. And I think that throughout history, I think government has been evil. I think wars are started by government. I think murder is, for the main part, done by government. Anything along those lines, any social inequality has been caused by government. And I don't think it's far-fetched to say that without government we would live in a better world. I think anarchy is just all it is a relationship, and all it means is you don't speak for me, and everything after that's application. I think this is an anarchical relationship right now. We're all mutually benefiting. There's no one arbiter. That would be the government. That is telling the three of us how we have to have this conversation and how we have to come together and do things like this. I think free choice is a good thing, and I think non-aggression is a good thing, and I think these things combined together would definitely create a world that would be definitely more peaceful, more prosperous, and essentially just a happier life for all of us.
All right, and as Supreme Chancellor of this podcast,
Wait, we gotta do.
you guys better
Make
shake
sure we
hands.
shake
Oh,
hands.
sorry, my palms are
Sorry.
sweaty.
Yeah,
I don't like my
me
sweaty
too.
palms. Thanks for coming, boys.
Yeah,
People, if you
It's
made
awesome.
it to the end, leave a comment. Say who you decide with. Keep it nice, or I'll just delete the comment because I censor my content. All right, that's good. Thanks for coming, boys.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.